Hello and welcome to another episode of Our Own Devices. And as always, we have something new to talk about. And again, there is a lot of things happening in the world of technology which is emerging. We're trying to figure out how to navigate this new path. Now, with us this time is Alex Nehmy, who is the field CSO for critical industries in Asia Pacific and Japan at Palo Alto Networks. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
So we're going to talk about IoT and how to secure IoT. And IoT has sort of gotten a lot of new superpower because of 5G. And everybody talks about 5G in the context of how you're going to download videos faster, how you're going to play games faster. But the real power of 5G is in sort of enabling this mesh of billions of connected devices, which we might not see. So, but that's also a completely new threat opportunity for the bad players. Alex, how do you look at this? Is this something we have to be really careful about?
Yeah, IoT, 5G really is that high-speed, low-latency connectivity that will bring millions upon millions of devices together. And what we will see is a huge amount of device density with IoT. And a great example is in smart cities. So in smart cities, we are going to see millions of devices, whether they're embedded in smart cars or in sensors out on the streets or in buildings, or even, on people, their own personable wearable IoT. We'll see a huge amount of device density with 5G. And this really makes these 5G networks a target for attackers because there are so many devices in there. There is bound to be, a higher proportion of vulnerable devices connected to these 5G networks. So we will see threat actors targeting these devices on 5G and then looking to take that opportunity to move laterally and attack their target, whether that is an organization's data or critical systems.
So it is not just about companies, right? As you mentioned, it's also about individuals. You have your smartwatches with a lot of very sensitive data because you have health data being collected now with a lot of precision. So how is the security layer going to come in? Is it going to come in, somewhere in between, or do you have it on device? How do you figure that out?
It's a really tough one for IoT. And from the personal point of view, we are going to see people carrying multiple IoT devices on their person. And this will lead to privacy and security risks around people's sensitive information, their health data that the IoT devices are measuring. And we will need to secure this data to protect the privacy of citizens. But what we have to understand is IoT devices are built to meet a certain cost for the market for consumers to buy them. And that doesn't necessarily include building a huge amount of cybersecurity into the devices. But once the average person takes these devices home, they're generally not focused on securing them, patching them, changing the passwords. And that often leaves these devices vulnerable. So when we get a whole bunch of devices together, when they're monitoring people, potentially recording them, measuring their heart rate, measuring their medical vitals, we need to make sure we're securing that data.
So, as you mentioned, a lot of these have very good processors for the functions that they are supposed to do, but when it comes to security or on-device security, they might not be good enough. Which also means that how we protect these devices is going to be tough, as you mentioned. So do we actually need to think beyond the kind of security frameworks we have, the understanding we have on device level protection?
Yeah, we need to make sure these devices are secure by default because we can't rely on the average consumer to keep them up to date. So it's absolutely essential that the manufacturers of these devices build security into their processes right from the beginning of designing and deploying a device. And once a consumer gets the device, it needs to be foolproof from a security point of view. So people really shouldn't think about, oh, I need to patch my device, I need to change the password. And another thing to consider is these devices are generally difficult to update. The patches may not be available for the lifetime of the device, and we can't install local security agents on them. They're a lockdown ecosystem, so they really need to come with their own security built into them. And that's for the consumer, but for industry, for the enterprise, we really do need a renewed focus on keeping these devices up to date and making sure that they're patched and making sure that they're secure. In the average enterprise, IoT makes up about 30% of the organization's attack surface. So that is this huge hidden attack surface that is just sitting there that threat actors can exploit, compromise the IoT devices, and then move laterally into an organization's systems. So we need to make sure there is a focus on patching these devices, on hardening them, changing the default passwords, and keeping them up to date, but also securing them in their own secure network zones as well.
So it might be a dumb question, but the fact that these are not very powerful devices, does it also make it tougher to sort of attack or change their, because essentially there's not much you can do on the device because, even though they're smart, they're dumb in a way.
Yes, they are smart and they are dumb in a way, but also the simple nature of these devices means that there are less avenues to attack. So in a way, the weaknesses are easier for an attacker to focus on because there's less things to attempt when they're looking at compromising these devices. And we have to understand that organizations are going to have thousands of different types of devices, and an attacker really only needs to compromise a single device to get access into the organization's network. So, 99% of these devices can be secure, but an organization can still be compromised from that one insecure device. But from the research that we've done and from what we see out there in the wild, these devices are generally shipped in an insecure state, but wholly they remain in that insecure state. They are rarely patched, and they're rarely patched because these devices are so diverse. Say there's 1,000 different manufacturers, that's 1,000 different patches that need to be applied. Now, organizations are struggling to patch their desktops and their servers and keep those up to date. They really can't stay up to date with the IoT devices. And when we include in that the uptime requirements, so in a manufacturing setting or in a healthcare setting, organizations can't turn off the manufacturing process to patch the IoT devices, and they can't turn off critical medical devices that are keeping people alive to patch them. So security very much ends up taking a back seat to the operational nature of the business, and the security of the IoT devices ends up lagging behind.
And since you're talking about millions of, maybe billions of devices and coming up from different companies, different protocols, so is it necessary to have some kind of a standardization so that it becomes easier to manage these from a security perspective? Are these kind of conversations happening in the industries right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing this driven in a number of jurisdictions globally, and the United States is one of those, where the government has realized that organizations aren't pushing for these devices to be secure, or that's not working. And the vendors making them are very much manufacturing these devices to be low cost, which results in them being insecure as well. So governments are beginning to step in, and they're proposing legislation to force vendors to build basic security into the devices. Some of the things that this legislation has is not having default passwords, or the first time a device is used, the default password has to change. So it's, building encryption, building some of the basic security standards that we've come to expect in many other industry verticals, building that into IoT devices as well.
I'm not sure you've seen the movie, but the new Mission Impossible movie sort of opens up the possibility of what happens when, you also put artificial intelligence into this mix, right? So are there these fears because, like, you have, things going rogue, we often talk about, something being attacked, but there is also the possibility that the data itself could be manipulated, that, you think something is working fine, but maybe the data. So are there enough studies done on what kind of threats are we even talking about? Especially because you're looking at medical IoT, again, it's a very different space from, let's say, comparing it to industrial IoT. The impact of both could be very different on different scales.
Yeah, it's a really good question. An analogy I often use is if an enterprise has a security incident in their enterprise systems, you can have a data spill, you can lose people's sensitive information or corporate intellectual property. And yes, that is a really bad outcome. But in the industrial space or in the medical space, the result of a cybersecurity incident could be potentially loss of life. We have medical devices that are literally injecting life-saving medications into people, but they are computer systems. We have to understand that these medical devices were once purely medical devices with a few digital smarts built into them. They're now fully fledged computer systems that are performing a medical function. And as computer systems, it's essential that they are patched, that they're hardened, and that they're secure. The integrity of these medical devices is absolutely critical. If they are vulnerable and they're compromised, we've lost the integrity of the device. And once we've lost the integrity, we can no longer rely on the device to perform as it was intended. And I fully expect that we will see in the coming years medical devices used to potentially cause negative health outcomes for patients. And in fact, in our 2023 security predictions from Palo Alto Networks, we predicted that securing IoMT in medical devices will be absolutely critical for the healthcare sector. And if we look forward to that unfortunate day when a cybersecurity incident does result in a patient, potentially dying, the hysteria and the impact to the general population of, well, can I go to hospital and can I trust these devices, will be really significant for the medical field globally. So it's absolutely imperative that we do keep these medical devices up to date, just to ensure the best health outcomes for patients.
The advent of 5G has sort of, given, IoT wings in a way, right? Because you have, a lot of new use cases coming in. For instance, you have fly-by-wire cars, but these also mean there are new, threat surfaces, right? Like, and absolutely new things and things that, again, we don't know how to tackle. So how is the industry looking at 5G? Does 5G need to come, with an inherent protection layer within it?
Yeah, we really need to make sure that 5G has the necessary security standards to keep those 5G networks secure. And what we are seeing in a number of cases is 5G networks being built with the least expenditure possible. So they're often leaving out the security layer. They're potentially using hardware and software vendors that may not have a very good track record when it comes to building security in. So just because it's a 5G network doesn't mean it's secure. We need to make sure that there are standards. We need to make sure the networks are built with security in mind. And we also need to reduce that blast radius. So if a part of the 5G network is compromised, it can't necessarily impact all of the devices plus the 5G core, plus all of the systems that are connected to that 5G. So, it's absolutely essential that 5G doesn't turn into this big insecure network with billions of devices. We need to build security in, and I would recommend following a zero trust approach for securing these big, large networks with millions of devices. And a great way to start is with a risk-based approach. So ensuring that the highest risks are firstly identified and mitigated. So we're dealing with the crown jewels and the most critical systems and securing those first, and making sure that we're not giving implicit trust to every single device on the network. We have to understand that many of these devices are insecure and can't be trusted. So for every digital interaction on that 5G network, that interaction has to be safe from a cybersecurity point of view, but also valid from a business point of view. We can't just allow open access to every device. We need to segment our most critical systems and secure them.
As somebody who has a view on what's happening around the world, if you could just tell us, what are the important threat vectors that you're seeing right now? Are there, again, things which are completely blowing your mind that, hey, we didn't think this could also happen?
Yeah, firstly is just really the insecure nature of all of these devices. They are becoming so ubiquitous, but also so critical in businesses, processes in general. And we will see in the coming years, and we're already seeing that in, say, the healthcare and manufacturing sector, where these devices are so critical that organizations can't operate without them functioning, or they find it really difficult to fall back to those old manual processes. So ensuring the devices themselves are secure is one. Another one is ransomware. We've seen over the past few years these industrial organizations like manufacturing targeted with ransomware, and IoT really is just another avenue for attackers to focus on the most insecure devices and move into an organization to deploy their ransomware. So that's another critical one. And then, making sure that these devices are really hardened and patched and kept up to date for the entire lifespan of the device. It's not good enough for an organization just to deploy a device once in a secure state and then forget about it. They have to patch them, keep hardening them, monitoring them for vulnerabilities. And something that I'm seeing across the entire Asia-Pacific region is organizations not getting the basics right when it comes to their industrial and IoT security. So many organizations really don't have visibility into what devices they even have. And you can't secure what you can't see. So the most basic step of securing IoT is knowing that you have it. The second step is knowing the security posture of that device. If you know that your most critical devices are highly insecure, then you can take those steps to update them or patch them or put a layer of security around them. And third is protecting the devices. So if a threat actor does get into your network, they don't have immediate access to attack your IoT devices that you're relying on. So it's visibility of the devices, knowing the security posture, but also segmenting the devices out and protecting them and keeping them secure. And that is a trend that I'm seeing across all of Asia Pacific at the moment.
It is interesting that you mentioned how enterprises don't have visibility on all the devices they have within them. But if you look at an individual level, I guess, even there is no full visibility, because you don't maybe really consider your smart speaker as something that is an IoT device and is vulnerable, can be hacked, could be listening in on you. So if you have any piece of advice for individuals, what would that be?
My advice would be, first look at procuring devices from those vendors and manufacturers who have a good track record around cybersecurity, because they're going to invest in their brand and invest in putting secure products out into the market. The other is, if you have any queries about the device, perhaps think about whether you actually need to use it. Do you need that camera or microphone or smart device in your living room listening to everything you're saying? Is it really adding to your life, or is it creating, a potential security weakness for you? And the third advice would be keep the devices up to date. So once a month, just think about, do I need to just click on the update button and keep these devices patched and secure? I think if you do those three things, you're never going to reduce that risk to zero, but you'll minimize that risk as much as you can.
Alex, thanks a lot for being on the show. Very insightful. And again, I'm sure a lot of our listeners will start looking at those connected devices in their homes and offices and workplace with a little bit more of skepticism, hopefully.
Thank you very much for having me.
So you were listening to Alex Nehmy from the Palo Alto Networks. We'll be back again next week with another guest, a lot more insight. You're listening to Our Own Devices with Nandagopal Rajan. The podcast is available everywhere you listen to your podcast.